It's a life, we live it this way. Together we play, we are IMA. From the beginning till the end of this day, we move and we sway, together we stay. We'll take your hand and help you through the mistakes. Whatever it takes, we'll find a brand new place. We'll join our hand in hands and then we'll fly till the end of the time, till our worries will die. We'll do it our way, the IMA way. IMA. It's a dream to be at our best. We fight on our own with no room for rest. It's a dream to be at our best. We fight on our own with no room for rest. And it's a legacy that we want to leave. Make them all believe there will be no grave. Turning white from the black, just like raising the flag. We'll do it our way, the IMA way.
Mr. Hacklin, Director, Systematics Technologies Private Limited, to welcome our first speaker for the session, Dr. Hacklin. Thank you, Mr. Khandelwal. For the floral welcome of our second speaker, Mr. Singhi, I invite on stage Mr. Manish Rafaria, practicing chartered accountant and executive council member, IMA. Thank you, Mr. Rafaria. We are very pleased and honored to have you sirs with us today. And without further ado, I would like to take the session forward. May I request the AV for the introduction of Dr. Hacklin, please.
a highly respected speaker, trainer and advisor on emerging issues in innovation, technology and entrepreneurship. Mr. Fredrik Hacklin is at the helm of the Corporate Innovation Lab at the Department of Management, Technology and Economics at ETH Zurich. A PhD in Management, Technology and Economics and an MSc in Computer Science, Mr. Fredrik Hacklin has served in various positions like a visiting scholar at the Stanford University, an associate with Booz & Company, and a visiting professor at Keio University, Japan. He was also the author of the well-known book, Management of Convergence in Innovation. He has multiple honors to his credit. A winner of the Annual Research Award for Communication Research, he was also selected into the Leaders of Tomorrow Fellowship Program by the St. Gallen Symposium. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome an intellectual and an innovator, Mr. Fredrik Hacklin, with a huge round of applause.
Thank you very much for the kind introduction. Far too generous. Thank you very much for having me here. It's my great pleasure. Dear Mr. President, dear Mr. Ambassador, dear members of the IMA, dear entrepreneurs, dear innovators, dear students, dear leaders of tomorrow. I'd like to start my speech a little bit in the spirit provided to us earlier this morning by Mr. Ambassador, kind of challenging us to a little bit try to rethink fundamental mindsets. We can be creative in redesigning our minds. And I'd like to try to make a little contribution to this by actually trying to a little bit challenge the ways how we actually think about innovation entrepreneurship. Innovation entrepreneurship is something that as a discipline is maybe not that revolutionary, not that new. We have it in our mainstream business school school books. But basically I try to share with you a couple of views that may or may not actually lead us to a little bit rethink the fundamental notions of innovation. So having that said, let's try to get started here. If we get the screen. So I'd like to start this talk by actually, I know we are supposed to talk about the future and innovation in the future, but actually let me start by going a little bit back in time. Actually, more than 10 years in time, where I'd like to start with a quote provided to us by the CEO of a European cell phone manufacturer. More than 10 years ago, he said, quote, "The mobile internet should remain under control of the mobile industry and not the computer makers." This was in the year 2001, the CEO of a European cell phone manufacturer, and what he basically was doing with this quote was kind of claiming ownership for an industry, right? So he was basically sensing some kind of a transformation, some kind of a potential disruption being ahead, and trying to protect the own domain, the own territory, through making such an assertion, such a statement. Well, this is more than 10 years ago. What happened? What happened with this claim of control? We all remember this gentleman, the late Steve Jobs. We also remember how he kind of challenged us to, what he said, think different, right? We also all remember the emergence of this device, and I guess the rest we all know, the rest is history. Okay. But what actually happened here was this guy basically didn't only challenge us to think different, moreover, he actually said, well, let's start building phones, okay? Let's start building phones as a new business, as a new technological trajectory for this particular company. But actually, this is only one side of the story. If we have a look at this picture, how many of you have seen this device before? Or maybe owned it, okay? I can see some hands here. It looks like an ordinary laptop, but actually what this device represented was kind of also a technological shift. This was the first laptop that was shipped with an integrated SIM card. So basically a laptop that is already able to communicate over cellular networks, provided by our friends in Northern Europe from Nokia. And basically, so
what happened here? Well, that these guys in the cold and freezing Finland were saying, well, let's us then go out there and build computers. Okay? So now the question, what are we seeing here? Basically, we kind of compare these two evolutions, these two kind of evolutionary trajectories. We see on the one hand how actually a computer manufacturer is entering the phone business, whereas at the same time a phone manufacturer entering the computer business. So the question we might want to ask us here is, what happened actually? And this leads me a little bit to the structure of my talk today. I'd like to cover three things. I'd first like to share with you a couple of ideas about what I call the convergence phenomenon, followed by deriving some implications for how this phenomenon actually should challenge us to rethink how we should lead and manage innovation in the future. And finally, hopefully not only to leave you with a lot of big question marks, actually also provide you some ideas for strategies how to get started. Okay. So, getting started, the convergent phenomenon. As with all these kind of difficult words, it always makes sense to start by actually looking into the dictionary. And if you look up convergence in the dictionary, we can see a lot of, I guess, interesting things. First of all, convergence can be said as something as the process or state of converging, right? The convergence of lines in the distance. We all might remember this from our maths courses 101, right? And also a little bit more like the biological changes. Here also we can talk about some kind of a tendency of unrelated animals and plants to evolve superficially similar characteristics under similar environmental conditions. So these bivalves have assumed similar characteristics by convergence. So again, we kind of see the notion of previously independent developments that kind of, basically out of coincidence, start to share similar characteristics. Okay, if we look a little bit more specifically in recent business press, we kind of see the world all over, right? So convergence, we can see the total media explosion. We can talk about actually the added value provided by convergence. We can talk about the business case for technology convergence. We can also see kind of more application-oriented solutions that are provided to us by the availability of convergence. So we can say, yes, convergence is kind of experiencing an increased media attention. Great. So just to kind of continue a little bit more with examples, let me again go back in time. Remember, we started in 2001. Let's move a little bit ahead 2 years to 2003. And let's have a look at this example. And now I think I need the sound.
You can have it all. In the Nokia 6600 phone, vision becomes reality. Nokia, connecting people.
Wow, what a device. From today's perspective, doesn't this look kind of antique already? Big device, big button, small screen. But this is in 2003, so 10 years ago, already these guys kind of offering a device. And what was the specialty here? Well, you kind of see the guy at the airport checking in. He's kind of astonishing the security guards by actually having a device that offers more than being just a phone. It actually integrates previously distinct technological applications, right? We have kind of the cell phone on one hand, we have our personal organizer, we have email, we have a watch, we have an address book, basically integrating previously distinct devices into one machine. Okay, 2003, 10 years ago, this device has been out there for quite a while. Now, let's have a look at another example and see what actually happened then 4 years later, if we go back to 2007, and probably now you might guess what might be coming.
An iPod, a phone, and an internet communicator. An iPod, a phone. Are you getting it? These are not 3 separate devices. This is one device. And we are calling it iPhone. Today, Apple is going to reinvent the phone.
Okay, so 2007, reinventing the phone. Now this was 4 years later than the previous example we saw. So kind of a similar idea, right? This, in a way, if you compare these side by side, the idea here of combining previous and different applications into one doesn't seem that new. But why are these guys claiming that they are reinventing the phone? 2007 claiming they are reinventing the phone. So some kind of difference needs to be there between these two examples. Let's go with a couple of more examples, because I think, whereas IT and telecom, mobile and fixed net is kind of one of the most prevalent examples of convergence, this is actually the only one. There are several other streams of convergence if we look around us. So just to mention a few here, we can talk about also the convergence between optics and precision technology with IT. If you think about camera phone, right? What's happening here, we see this emergent spillover between these previously distinct device categories. We suddenly end up in a situation where actually, previously dominant manufacturers of digital cameras are also increasingly being outcompeted by players from previously distant industries. And if we actually look up who is the biggest producer of digital cameras today, this is actually counted by number of devices shipped, not necessarily by turnover. It's actually not one of the Japanese usual suspects. It's actually Nokia, who is currently selling by number of devices shipped the largest amount of digital cameras. So something is also going on in this industry. But also similarly, if we look into the convergence of life sciences and the food industry, so if we think about examples of functional foods, when we look into some certain products that we might find in the pharmacy or in the supermarket, also here it's not always that clear, is this rather a nutrition product or is this a drug? So basically also here the distinctiveness isn't that obvious anymore. Similarly, pulp and paper industry together with information technology is what we can see in today's modern packaging solutions, or what we see in the confluence of building technologies together with IT in intelligent buildings. So it's kind of all around us, we basically just need to start looking for these examples. Now, probably asking ourselves, why is this interesting? Why am I asking myself this question? Or why do at least I believe this is interesting? And let me kind of to evolve this a little bit further, let me try to talk about this change in terms of old and new paradigm, right? It's always easy to basically establish a difference between what was the old world like and what was the new world like. In order to structure this a little, I'd like to take this onto these 3 dimensions. Let's talk about changes in industry, let's talk about changes in strategy, and let's talk about changes in innovation. So in this old paradigm, on the industry level, what did the old world look like? Well, traditionally, we can say in the old paradigm, what was actually the industry about? Well, an industry was traditionally formed out of a set of firms which had something in common, right? What did they have in common? Well, they kind of shared a common knowledge base, because this was kind of what defined the boundaries of the industry. Companies and organizations who shared similar knowledge bases were kind of forming one industry. Now, in this new paradigm, we see how convergence actually challenges these established industry boundaries. Okay, what does it mean actually from a strategic perspective? Kind of thinking about how to position yourself in such an industry. Well, again, in the old paradigm, we can say, in order to enter an industry as an outsider, it's actually very costly, because you need to overcome these forces of competition that exist within the industry. You need to make sure you're actually able to enter an industry and overcome these entry barriers that the knowledge production in this industry has been creating for you. And now, suddenly in this new paradigm, we can see how new entrants can emerge overnight. Basically, we see companies who we haven't been able to anticipate as potential competitors before suddenly are head-on competing with us. And then, what does it actually mean for knowledge creation and innovation within our organizations? Regardless of whether it's a newly founded startup venture or an established large organization. Well, traditionally, again, firms had the mission to create knowledge within their industry, thereby gaining advantage over firms beyond their industry. And in this new paradigm, the big question is, how should firms actually behave? And this is kind of how convergence actually poses these fundamental new questions. So basically we can say that convergence challenges our existing understanding of innovation. And kind of to a little bit delve further into this, we should ask the question, what is actually the mechanism behind? What actually happens when technologies or industries converge? And in order to get some initial understandings on this, we conducted together with Stanford University and the SwissNext in San Francisco a study on basically a set of prominent firms that were all sharing these similar challenges, that they were all experiencing convergence between these four industry fields: telecom, IT, media, entertainment. And the companies we looked at were many of these usual suspects we could think of, and we basically conducted a multiple case study based on semi-structured interviews, talking to senior managers, triangulating with archival data, etc., etc. So, but not to jump into furthermore of the methodological details of the research design, we actually came up with one major insight, and this is what we call the evolutionary convergence process. So, the point here that we're seeing that whereas companies kind of all were sharing similar challenges to the extent of which, yes, we are all experiencing this kind of potential threat and newly emerging competitors out of previous existing industries, actually these challenges were not all exactly on the same page. There were kind of different stages of this convergence. And basically it started all with something that we can call the convergence of knowledge, or the convergence of scientific domains. So basically, what we can see, if we trace these developments back, is that convergence isn't necessarily initiated by the deliberate action of, let's say, corporate boards or managerial decisions. It's actually something that already starts to emerge at the grassroots level. This is something where we see how actually scientific developments already start to create these spillovers, start to create these interactions between previously distinct knowledge fields. And here, for example, if you think about IEEE as one of the big scientific organizations for electrical engineering design, as opposed to ACM, the Association for Computing Machinery, again in turn hosting a lot of scientific activity for the computer science field. If we trace these scientific developments over time, and actually we did this in a separate study, following the interaction between these two communities over the past 50 years, we can actually see that the convergence between these two fields started much earlier than in the 1990s. So actually starting already as far back as in the 1960s. Okay, so convergence starts somewhere earlier. Now, once this scientific convergence, or let's call it the knowledge convergence, has taken place, we can see the emergence of the next phase, where we actually see the convergence of technological artifacts, where we suddenly end up in situations where we see technologies being able to substitute other technologies in previously distant industries. And here's an example. We all remember what Skype basically did to the traditional long-distance phone industry, right? So here, Skype entered this business with a fundamentally new way of connecting voice calls over the network, but not necessarily yet with any deliberate or any kind of well-formulated business model. And this is also the point here. Whereas we can see the convergence of technologies as a certain phase, this doesn't necessarily yet guarantee any economic viability. Because this is given in the next stage, the convergence of applications or the convergence of business models. This is where we see suddenly a situation of firms being able to generate revenues in previously unrelated industries. And I think we all remember, again, what iTunes did to the music industry, right? This is, again, technologically, maybe not that revolutionary, because, I mean, we had MP3 codecs and MP3 players out there for quite a while. But basically, what these guys did was to introduce a fundamentally new way of sharing and distributing music. And this is something that came basically overnight to the established players in the traditional music industry, and which basically kind of competed or started to compete with their established models in previously unexperienced ways. And finally, once this type of competition across industry boundaries starts to take place, then we can ask ourselves, where will this result in? When we suddenly have companies and an increasing amount of companies who actually start to compete across industry boundaries. Well, we can ask ourselves the question, will these industry boundaries then prevail? And this is actually then leading us to the last phase, the convergence of industries, where we suddenly see firms from different industry sectors beginning to compete and actually eroding entirely the previously distinct, or the previously defined industry boundaries. And here, again, if you think about companies such as Nokia and Microsoft, who, if you look back in time, 15, 20 years, had reasonably little to do with each other, and today are fierce competitors, and actually moreover, but it is resulting to more than competition, right? A very dense collaboration. So basically, we can see convergence evolving through these stages, and not only being initiated by any deliberate managerial action, but walking us through the stages of knowledge convergence, technological convergence, business model convergence, and finally, industry convergence. Now, what does it actually mean then for innovating? What can we learn from this for innovating within our organizations? And here, in the context of our study, I talked to one senior manager, actually a vice president of a US mobile-based service provider, and he gave me this quote, which I kind of found pretty interesting, actually pretty much telling what it's all about. What he said was, quote, "What you want to have with any convergence is the best of both worlds. You want more than the sum of the parts, but often, unfortunately, you end up with less than the sum of the parts." And I think this summarizes very well the kind of the internal challenges with what many organizations experience in actually being able to manage and capture these convergence opportunities. Because whereas you might be able to kind of find these new technologies that are able to bridge the gap, it's actually the key challenge to find new business models that not only are basically able to position yourself either inside an old or inside a new industry, but actually being able to define business models that kind of capture the boundaries and actually transcend or span a business across these previously distinct industry boundaries. So basically, being able to search and find business models that create a bridge between industry A and industry B. And now, asking the question then, well, how do firms actually change their business model? What do they do then to kind of bridge this gap, to establish such a bridge? And here again, we try to a little bit study this further by looking actually into the industry of, again, surprise, IT and telecom. And here, starting a little bit by this value chain perspective, in order to kind of build up kind of a picture of how the industry works, we can very roughly separate these companies that we looked into within this value chain, the chain of creating value within industry. We can think about the component manufacturers who actually deliver the silicon for the device to be manufactured. We can think about the infrastructure manufacturers, those who develop the technology for the networks. We can think about the device manufacturers, those who actually develop the tablets and smartphones that we already have in our hands. The network service providers who provide connectivity, and finally the content providers who provide us with entertainment, email, and all the fascinating applications. Now, if we look into this kind of value chain and try to understand where actually these, previous distinct industries, or in this case, previously distinct value chains, kind of collide and actually create these crossovers, what we see is sort of a trend towards the biggest squeeze being in the middle of the value chain. So basically, think of it this way: once one value chain, as such, collides with another one, and another one, and another one, we see kind of the biggest mess, the biggest battle somewhere in the middle, the device manufacturers. This is the segment of the value chain that is being increasingly squeezed, and this is where you need to make sure you are able to capture this value. Whereas on the more ends of this value chain, you are actually finding yourself in more stable scenarios. Here you're able to kind of a little bit more act out of the comfort zone. Okay, but whereas in the middle, you are somehow in what we call the danger zone. So actually, if we try to formalize this more over kind of the development of value, or how value migrates in terms of convergence, we can think about sort of an axis of value stability over the upstream versus downstream developments. And we can actually say a picture where on the very ends of this value chain, we can see a stability of value, whereas in the middle, we see kind of more volatile characteristics of value. But this is where you need to really make sure you're able to kind of compete and are able to capture very quickly and in a very agile manner the new business model. So, particularly in order to do so, one opportunity may be actually also to move within this value chain, right? If you are somewhere in the middle, you might actually say, aha, maybe it's safer for me to try to move towards areas of increased value stability. So what we can say is, depending on where you are in this value chain, upstream or downstream moves may be necessary. Well, and in doing these kind of upstream or downstream moves, in order to be able to search and find for a new business model, what kind of characteristics for innovating a business model did we actually see? And in a nutshell, what we saw were basically two fundamentally different ways of managing this business model change. We can see that those companies, on the one hand, basically developed a business model aside of their traditional one. Basically, they started a new business unit either through acquiring a new firm or setting up a new business unit, which they kind of kept relatively protected and relatively separate from their existing organization. So that's what we call it, keeping it in a cage, or basically keeping it in a quarantine. So they were quarantining a new business model, making sure that it exists as a separate crop and see what happens and see whether it works. As opposed to this, the other approach, the other type of companies were actually more of pivoting their business model. So what they were actually doing was more of continuously exploring for ways to change their existing business model. Not necessarily searching for additional ones, which you store in a separate unit, but actually out of your existing position, try to make small tweaks, try to make small changes in your existing business model. If it doesn't work, move back and search for another one. So pivoting, like from the notion of a basketball player, where you're standing on one leg and trying to move and search for other directions, this is sort of the notion we saw here. So either those firms who quarantine their existing business model or pivot the existing business model into new ones. Examples of what we saw here, we can think of companies here, we're pursuing this quarantining approach, starting new units, starting new separate business models in separate units, as opposed to those who continuously actually changed their core business model. Now, we can ask ourselves, well, this may sound nice in theory, but does it really matter? What is the impact, really? Is this maybe something which has a marginal impact? Is this something which we should not maybe be too worried about? Or what does it actually yield? If we look into actually how the mobile industry has changed over time, just taking a rough 10 years picture, looking into the top 5 biggest sellers of mobile devices back more than 10 years ago again. You might remember, back in the ancient history, in the year 2000, the top 5 players, according to Gartner Group, with these 5. Nokia, Motorola, Ericsson, Siemens, Panasonic. So we might remember some of them may sound very ancient from today's perspective, but 10 years later, how many of them are still left in the top 5? Any number? 1 to 5. 2, I can hear 2. More or less, 1, okay, so we get some 1s, not 2s here. Let's look 2010, and again, this is already 3 years ago, but actually, you see, 10 years later, kind of 1 still left, and as we know, also a little bit, at that stage already shaking, and Ericsson, together with the merger with Sony, kind of also still there. But interestingly, if you look into these players in between, number 2, number 3, number 4, the interesting story is these players were somebody who either didn't exist before, like if you look into Research in Motion, or Samsung LG, players who basically didn't have a very kind of prominent track record in the mobile industry. Players who basically emerged, not out of nowhere, they had been existing for a while, but they were simply not on our map. We didn't have the foresight tools to actually look into these companies. Our competitive analysis and our search for positioning ourselves on the market was based on the notion of only looking into our existing industry boundaries. We weren't able to anticipate changes that were coming from beyond. And in order to lead such a change within an organization, here also Another major organizational challenge that was experienced is again something I tried to summarize with this quote. Again, a vice president of a US-based mobile service provider told me, you know what, Fredrik, actually, it's not really about convergence, it's about collision. Whenever you have two industries that evolve independently and you're trying to merge them, you actually have a fundamental problem of user mindsets. That's where it really starts. Mindset and language. People speak a very different language, people think in terms of very different things. So basically what we're seeing within the organizations when we try to lead innovation, lead change, is actually more of a collision than a convergence. We need to manage the clash, we need to manage the collision of cultures, technological expertise, mindsets that we all need to kind of bridge within our organization. And if you talk to Russell Reynolds Associates, one of the biggest, basically senior headhunters in this field, they actually in a recent study identified convergence as one of the major recruiting challenges for organizations. Because it's very difficult to find this type of talent that is actually able to lead innovation in such a way that is not only focusing on managing knowledge creation in a specific area, but actually is able to bridge the gaps between disciplines. This asks for managers, innovation leaders who actually are able to embrace these changes and are able to kind of bridge and moderate between previously distinct industries. And I think this is a lesson for all of us. We need to keep in mind that managing convergence is actually about managing heterogeneity, managing interdisciplinarity, and managing collision. Now, finally, before leaving you with these, very kind of wide-ranging thoughts, let's maybe close here with a couple of ideas or strategies for how getting started, for how managing this innovation. And first of all, to make sure we get the things straight, when leading innovation, we need to make sure to remember what actually the underlying purpose is. What is it that we actually are supposed to lead? And here I'd like to start with this distinction between actually invention versus innovation, because this is something that easily becomes confused in mainstream discussion. So actually looking into an example of Nikola Tesla, right? For many of us, the father of the magnetic field, actually being one very inventive guy who kind of laid the foundations for modern electricity. And actually what he did was manage sort of conversion. He managed the conversion of cash into ideas. Actually, he didn't make very much money. He lived a very modest life because he was spending all his savings into running his personal lab, his personal research lab in his garage. So basically what he did was taking all his money, taking all his resources, and converting them into ideas. He was an inventor. He managed the process of converting cash into ideas. As opposed to Thomas Edison, who we all might associate with the light bulb. He was maybe not necessarily the guy who laid the foundations for the technological shift. He was the guy who actually was able to convert ideas into cash. He saw these technological developments, and you might see these guys lived more or less at the same time. He was able to see these ideas and actually find economic opportunities. He saw economic viability and explored business models that actually commercialized these inventions. Right? So that's why he actually managed the process of innovation. He converted ideas into cash. So what we can conclude from this is, whereas innovators do profit from their innovators, inventors may or may not necessarily profit from their work. So when leading innovation and thinking about how to organize innovation processes, to design organizational setups, to think about incentive schemes, it's important for us to keep in mind that we actually should focus on managing innovation, the conversion of ideas into cash, as opposed to managing invention. Now, we're trying to manage innovation and capture these conversion opportunities. Let me give you here two examples. One example is Intel. The company we basically see all around us. We see their components, where we use many of them in our daily lives. This is a company which has been out there for quite a while. And once they saw this emerging convergence, once they saw this emerging spillover between previous and distinct technologies, they weren't necessarily starting to fundamentally redesign technological development. They were not starting to redesign their invention. The R&D basically remained pretty much the same. But they started to think about ways how to actually be positioned in the convergent future in such a way that it allows them to capture these spillovers, to capture these opportunities between previous and distinct industry boundaries. And this is basically what made Intel into a platform player. They started to, instead of solely selling these distinct components, to actually provide integrated platforms that consisted of not only central processing units, but actually also had technologies for communication, right, radio, Wi-Fi, etc., power management, security solutions, all basically integrated on one platform, allowing the other players in the industry to use Intel as a reliable partner and as a reliable facilitator of future convergent solutions. So basically, trying to think in terms of platforms that allow us to capture these convergent opportunities, these distinct technological streams into one platform for creating our business. Another case in point here, it was mentioned earlier, the company ABB, traditionally the Swiss-Swedish joint venture, which basically has a long history, a long track record in electricity and power solutions, also increasingly is starting to see a change going on. Power development and power generation, power distribution is not necessarily anymore only about what it used to be before. It's not anymore only about high voltage and medium voltage. It's actually also starting to be about very, very low voltage. Because if you think about the emergence of the smart grid, power generation, power distribution also increasingly requires the capabilities of programming, software, smart algorithms that actually make sure we are able to manage the complex demands on our electricity infrastructure in the future. And here what ABB actually did in order to tackle this head-on was again not necessarily to fundamentally redesign their inventions, not fundamentally redesigning the way they structure corporate R&D laboratories, but actually they started to do a set of kind of interesting convergent investments. And here are 3 examples of those. So basically investing in companies such as Ventix, software for network management, power outage recovery solutions, or also infrastructure for charging electrical vehicles. And I think this is also kind of an interesting trend to keep in mind for all of us who might be interested in starting up new ventures, who maybe want to think about starting your own business, your own startup. Also, when you can think about growth potential and going forward with this idea. Maybe it's not anymore the ultimate goal to think about IPO or think about venture capital investment. Actually, also partnering with one of these bigger players who actually have these corporate venturing funds who actually are interested in investing in you, investing in your own technological opportunities, might be actually a very interesting way to grow your company. Because with this, you get more than only financial assets, you actually also get relational capital and access to established supply chains, which might be much more crucial in developing in such a changing environment. So basically, we have talked now a little bit about convergence as a phenomenon, what convergence actually is about, where it comes from, and also how convergence increasingly changes the traditionally existing mindset of innovation and managing and leading innovation entrepreneurship in organizations. Finally, getting here a couple of ideas on how we actually could think of implementing and designing strategies for convergence in this context. So actually, let me try to summarize this by a little bit observing sort of the change in mindset that we're actually seeing here. And if you think of convergence as something that's actually occurring as an external trend, right? So we see kind of convergence of many different things. We see the convergence of knowledge bases, the convergence of disciplines, of technologies, applications, business models, or as we saw, within entire industries. What is actually required within the organizations, what is actually required for the innovators of the future is actually to lead convergence by an internal divergence. We need actually to manage divergence in terms of our capabilities. We need to widen our strategic horizon. We need to divert our expertise. We need to think broader, much, much broader in terms of recruiting. And also we need to be able to make sure we can anticipate the competition of tomorrow. So let me basically close by saying, convergence is a complex story, and convergence requires divergence. And with that, let me thank you very much for your attention. Thank you.